All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Schmattz Outdoors. This is going to be the season-ending video for me for my 2020 trapping season. What we're going to go over today is just a few things that I kind of learned. It's going to be kind of a lessons learned, season wrap-up type of video. I got my laptop here. During the season, every night, I actually journal. So I actually write down what I seen that day, if I made catches, where I made catches, that type of stuff. The only thing that I had a little issue keeping track of is muskrats. I was doing the best I could trying to keep track of, I caught 7 muskrats in this slough today, 6 in this slough. I was catching so many of them, 30, 35 a day. I was doing good on about 25 of them. I could keep track of which ones where I caught them, but there was a few that I caught, like a single in this slough or a single in that one. I was having trouble trying to keep all those straight, but to the best I could, I journaled and I basically kind of kept track of all that. I kept track of how many sets I added that day, if I pulled any sets that day, that type of stuff. So I actually have a pretty good record of how many sets I had out each day. Like I said, and going through that process kind of led me to the list. I got a pretty good list here of kind of lessons I learned this year. Some are pretty simple and self-explanatory. We'll go through my list pretty quick and then I'll just give you a little wrap up on the season. First of all, before I get going here, I just want to thank you guys for watching all my videos this season. If you guys have any videos you'd like to see over the summer, please leave comments below. I'm going to be trying to put out a video every other Friday throughout the summer going into the fall. Sometime in the fall I'll probably actually switch to one every week, but through the rest of the summer here we're going to go one every other week and hopefully trying to get them going live to you guys on Fridays. If you guys have stuff you'd like to see, please leave a comment and I'll see what I can do about getting videos put together for you guys. All right, let's get right into it. So the number one animal I caught this year was muskrats, but during the season I was catching a fair amount of muskrats every day with the number of sets I had out. I had roughly 80 sets, 75 to 80 sets out every day, and I was catching about 30 to 35 muskrats, so it's right around that 40% range. I did have a lot of snapped off traps, and I do have some things I wrote down for that. The number one thing is that I noticed while I was editing the videos for you guys is a lot of locations I had 2 sets in one location or even just a single set in a location. Some of that was just I run out of traps, that type of deal. But I noticed when I was editing, day after day, I was making multiple catches, or I was, if I had one set, I was making a catch every day on a set. I made a note that I probably should have been adding sets in those locations. Obviously, they were good locations because I was making catches every day. I feel like I should have been adding some sets to a bunch of locations that I was catching, 2 every day, or if I didn't have 2 catches, I had a catch and a set off trap or something like that. Well, that tells me there was a lot of muskrats in that area. There was 2 sets in particular, and I actually went back and some of the hut trapping videos. The first time I attempted it was one of the locations I had a double set. It was where I tried to hand catch that one that I didn't get on video for you guys, but I did actually have him caught by the tail and picked him out of the water. But I only had just the very tip of his tail and he wiggled out of my hand. Right there, those 2 sets, I think I figured out of the 9 days I trapped, 7 out of the 9 days I had doubles there. And one day I had one caught and the other one my trap was just knocked off the stand. Right there would have been a perfect example of a spot where a guy should have added another set right there. The next one is I have a lot of these 4-foot poles. They're just a gray electric fence post, 3/8 diameter poles. I actually have bought some 5-footers and some 6-footers because there are some sloughs that are too deep. I did not take them with me when I put out my sets for whatever reason. I just didn't think the water was going to be that deep in some of the sloughs. I actually had one set where a muskrat, my set was so high up on my pole that when I caught him, he actually got this hags bracket up off of my pole, and I had to fish it. Luckily, he was laying there and the slough was clear enough I could see him, and I ended up getting him hooked and picked out of there. But there was quite a few places that I had problems with my sets tipping over. Part of that was I wasn't getting my pole pushed far enough in the mud. I should have been switching those poles out to longer poles, because I do have the longer poles. I just, for whatever reason, wasn't using them. Third thing on my list is adjusting my triggers. I had on the opening day, I had all my 110s. I had pretty much all tuned, so the first notch was tuned so they'd be pretty sensitive. I found an issue with that when I was putting my carrots on, like this guy. This is my standard setup for this year. That I almost think that the waves were enough just to rock my carrot enough. It was setting off my traps, because the first day I think almost every one of my 110s was set off, and I think I only had like one catch out of about 20 of them. And that was another thing too, that I only had about 20 110s, so not every location got 110s. Towards the end of the season, I actually think the 110s were outproducing my pole sets with a 1.5 and my bait up above them. I've since bought quite a few more 110s, so I'm tuning the second notch. So what I ended up doing is setting everyone on the second notch, because they weren't adjusted, so it took a little more effort to get them to set off, which meant the waves didn't set them off. But I feel like I had a lot of them that were, the carrots were half chewed off before they were finally set off, whether or not I caught that muskrat or not. What I got here, so the next thing is carrot orientation. So this is the way I set my set the entire season. So basically my trap is turned sideways. I have a hags bracket on here. I found that I want my carrot about halfway up in the trap. So the bottom part of the trigger I basically just had sticking down in case they bump it with their feet or something like that. But that's basically how I was sliding them on there. Well, what I figured out is if they chew on this end of the carrot towards the end of the trigger, you know, it's going to be fairly sensitive. But if they chew on this end of the carrot, they got to move that carrot a lot to get that to set off. But that's the way I ended up setting them the whole entire season. It actually is kind of a pain to get them set with their spring tip kind of into the jaws like that. Some of them, so there's some traps that just will not set like that. You know, so what I ended up doing towards the end of the season when I was trapping the huts and stuff like that, I tried this type of setup. So what I did is I just stuck the triggers through the carrot. Both triggers, or both wires of the trigger through the carrot. I actually think this might be a little bit better setup, honestly. I don't like that my carrot is so high up in the trap, because I want that about water level, so that means my jaws are only like that far above where the muskrat's going to be swimming. And I don't know if I really like that, but I did try it and I did catch a few muskrats with it. I don't think I did a very good job of showing you the catches when I did make them like that. But what I like about this is it's out on the end of the trigger, so they don't have to move it very far, and that trap should be going off. You know, that's the most sensitive part of the trigger, and that should hopefully do me a little better on catches. I'm gonna do a video showing type of sets and that type of stuff for muskrats, raccoons, coyotes, all that stuff later on here, so I'm not gonna go too in depth. But what I also thought of is I have this setup, so it's real similar to the other setup, but what I did is I actually took and bent my wire like that with a little kink on it. So what I don't like about this is I actually had a lot of carrots. So what I didn't like about this one is almost every time that trap was set off, my carrot was gone. So I don't know whether it was just the few sets I had that it was just coincidence that they were falling off or flying off when the trap was going off. But what I like about this set is if they start chewing on that carrot, they're most likely not going to chew it off to the point that it falls off of there. And with it being pinched, so I have the wires going in on each end of that carrot, the trigger wires are kind of squeezing it. I feel like there's very little chance that that carrot's going to come flying off there unless they get, you know, a good amount of the end of it chewed off. So yeah, I'm going to maybe give this a shot next year just to see how that works out. I guess, I don't know if I showed it very well, but all I'm using is just baby carrots. I don't want to mess around cutting carrots and all that. I probably pay a little more, but I went through 5.5 pounds of baby carrots this season. They're fairly cheap. I typically look for ones with like a little bit bigger size carrots in there, so I probably get a few less carrots per bag. But one like that is almost too thin to thread it onto the wire. But one like that, if I was using where the wires are bent in the end of it, it would probably be fine. But otherwise, you need a pretty good sized carrot. Like this one ain't very long, but you can see the difference in size. You know, this one here would thread onto a wire pretty easy without splitting the carrot. But yeah, that's all I'm using, just your standard baby carrot. I don't go too crazy. They're cheap, they're very inexpensive. Next thing on my list is I found out after the season that a lot of my muskrat stretchers were wider than what the standard is. A standard muskrat stretcher should only be 6.5 inches wide at the base of the stretcher. Some of mine were over 8 inches. They were like 8 1/8 inches wide. Well, that ended up killing me on length. So what I'm gonna do is modify all my stretchers. I'm gonna try and get them all down to that 6.5 inch width. I have basically 3 different types of stretchers. I already have most of them already modified, and there'll be one of the next videos coming up is going to be a video on showing my muskrat stretchers and then what I ended up doing to them to get them down to the 6.5 inch width like they should be. You know, stretching them that much too wide, I figured out on a muskrat that on that 8.5 or 8 1/8 inch wide stretcher would only go to about a 2XL muskrat. If I put him on a correct size, he was over 3XL. So that extra length right there, I mean, could have been costing me $1 or more per muskrat. So it's a pretty significant deal. And I kind of feel like a lot of people probably don't realize a lot of their older stretchers. So I bought all these stretchers used, and I don't think a lot of people realize that they're not to the today's standard, and they're probably losing width, which means they're losing money on them. The next thing is, I learned kind of years ago, but I really didn't put it into too good a practice this year, is if I have 2 sets and say they're like 6 feet apart and one set is making catches every time and the other one's not being messed with, which I did have a few different places that this was happening to me, I need to move that set. The one that's not making catches, I did it a couple times, and as soon as I moved them, even, you can have your sets literally 2 feet apart. They don't have to be that far apart, just so one muskrat can't set them both off. But what I ended up doing is a few of them, I had them set like on like a little bay, and I had one here and one here. This one was making catches every time. This one wasn't being messed with. Once I finally moved this one over by that one, they were both making catches. So even moving a set just a couple feet makes a difference. So if you have a set and you think it's in a good location, you may just need to move it a few feet to get it out away from the weeds a little farther, or something just as simple as that. Another thing that I did learn, when it starts to freeze, like you can see these carrots are kind of dried up, you know, they're all, when it starts to freeze outside, they actually shrivel up. I need to just make a better habit of replacing my carrots on there. I use carrots and sugar beets on my baited pole sets where the bait's above the water. The sugar beets actually hold up very well, and they stay kind of sweet smelling, and that's why I switched to a sugar beet. I just take a sugar beet and cut it into like 1-inch cubes. I find them on the side of the road. There's a lot of sugar beets around in my area here. I pick up like 2 or 3 sugar beets a year, and I'll just cut them into 1-inch cubes before the season, and then stick a sugar beet on one side and a carrot on the other. I need to make if it starts freezing overnight, like if it's above freezing during the day so it's open water, if it starts freezing at night, I need to make a habit of replacing my carrots because they literally shrivel up into almost nothing. And I know that every year I think of it, I just never take the time to go. Like it's almost like a maintenance day. I just need to maintain them all and just switch carrots. It's hard to do because you never know in my area here how long you're gonna have before the sloughs finally freeze up. Some seasons I don't even trap muskrats open water because the sloughs are froze before the season starts. So it's kind of tough to like, oh, do I replace all my carrots today and then it'll be froze up tomorrow, and basically get 1 day out of them, if that. The last thing on muskrats is I had a few traps, and actually talking about 110s in particular, I had a few traps, and they're actually, the ones that I noticed the most were Duke ones. They have really big eyelets on them, that are almost twice the diameter of these. I kind of think when the traps are going off, set like this, when the trap goes off, that muskrat can't go anywhere because it's solid to the pole. And I actually wonder if some of them were, and they don't shut as tight. And I kind of wonder if I was snapping like their noses and they were actually wiggling around enough and got themselves pulled out of my traps. But I had, by that big culvert, I had one that was set up, I think damn near every day, and I think I only ended up catching one muskrat off of it. A trap like that, I should have been yanking that trap out of there, set it aside so I know that it needs tuning or something needs to be done with it, or I just need to not use that particular trap. But yeah, I had a few different places where I had traps that were repeatedly set off with nothing in them. I should have been switching those out with a fresh trap. Just to see, and even I had a couple pole sets that my pole would be turned, different things like that. I did learn actually, and I don't have it on my list, but I did learn, and I didn't bring one out. The bait clips I use are from Sun Valley Supply. They actually have on their website that to keep your poles from turning, if you take a second one and put it on the bottom, and when you stab it in the mud, that keeps your pole from turning. I really wish I'd have known that. I just learned that like in the last week. But yeah, some of those that, anyway, I had one that my pole kept turning, like every time I checked it, my pole would be turned, leaned the wrong way, whatever. I probably should have been replacing that trap because they were messing with it. I don't know if my trap had too high a pan tension that they weren't setting it off, or I don't know why they kept messing with it and I couldn't catch them, but I should have maybe been swapping out my trap right in that instant. All right, moving on. We're moving on to mink. I am not a mink trapper. I will be the first to admit, I get lucky. Last year I had 3. This season I didn't catch any. I didn't really try too hard this year, I'll be the first to admit. I had it on my list of things to do in the off season, which it is right now, to adjust all my mink traps last year, because I had a lot of them that were very stiff. I have wood pans on my triggers for my 120s. I mean, you could have stood a red brick on one and they wouldn't set off, and a mink doesn't weigh that much. So I had it on my list to adjust all my traps. At the end, I went through like 20 traps to find 4 or 5 that I could get set, and then they still were stealing my bait anyway. When I run them the last week of my main line, I had 3 or 4 that my bait was stole out of there, chicken thighs and legs, so the bones and everything were completely out of my box without setting my trap off. So I need to get those adjusted. I actually was working a little bit on that this weekend, and I was working on getting some of the new 110s I bought all set up, ready to go. The bait thing I got on my list, just make sure you check your bait every day. I actually am gonna get some more weasel rat traps with a big pan on there. And if they start stealing my bait, I'm thinking some of it might be weasels doing it, and I'm gonna be sticking a rat trap behind my 120. But yeah, checking my bait every day I think is a pretty big thing on my mink boxes. I walk by them like, oh yeah, the trap is still set. I don't need to do anything with it. I should have been doing something. I should have been checking to make sure there's still bait in them. If there's no bait, they ain't gonna go in there. I mean, a very slim chance they're not gonna go in there. I mentioned the rat trap, so I actually am gonna get some more of the rat traps and get them stuck in my mink boxes if they start stealing my bait out of there. I don't want to be catching a mink in my rat trap. I want to be clear about that. I think some of the ones that were stealing my bait were some by like some real grassy, swoopy areas, which is where you're going to want to have your mink boxes. But I think it was weasels stealing my bait. And I think by putting a rat trap behind my mink trap, or behind the 120, I might be able to pick off a few of those weasels, which I do want to catch because I think they're fun to catch. But I also don't want them stealing my bait. That's the number one thing. I don't want them stealing my bait. And then fourth thing, just as simple as I should have had them out. I should have, when I was muskrat trapping, almost all those sloughs that I had muskrat sets, I should have had a mink box there. I had plenty of bait. I used basically a whole muskrat for bait a lot of times. When I did it this year, I didn't have any muskrat carcasses, so I was just using some rotten chicken, which I actually think might have worked just as good or better. It didn't rot quite as bad as like a muskrat carcass will. All right, so that's the last thing on mink. Like I said, I am not a mink trapper. If you guys have suggestions for me, leave them in the comments, because like I said, I know there's mink around. I actually just seen I was putting up a deer stand, and I actually seen 2 mink this season, or this summer already, in a place I didn't even think there would be mink. So all right, on to coyotes. So I had the best season I've ever had on coyotes this year. I caught 42 coyotes total. 41 of them were in 30 days roughly. I don't really know what happened this season, why that was the case. I did have very mild weather through the season. Like, I didn't have a super lot of freeze thaw like I normally have. It was freezing at night, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like, you know, consecutive days of 0 degrees Fahrenheit here. I don't know, like I said, I don't know if there was just that many more around, or if I just had them in the right spots. I mean, I had a few spots. I had one spot I caught 8 coyotes in 1 yard, essentially. I had another spot I caught 7, basically all on one field. You know, right there's 15. You know, a couple spots like that, it bumps your numbers up real quick. But I still, without those, you know, I still ended up with 27 coyotes caught around, you know, our country. I was putting on about 100 miles a day, so whether you consider that a long line or not, that's what I had. All right, on to my thoughts for the season on the coyotes. Once the freezing weather starts, I really need to make an effort to go and pop all my traps, actually get them out of the ground, make sure that they're still working, you know, that I didn't get dirt clumps underneath them or whatever, and actually put peat moss. I use dry peat moss, so put some more dry peat moss under my trap, rebed each one. I went around and I used a screwdriver, and I actually pop under one of the spring levers, and I just pop them free to make sure that the levers aren't froze to the ground. It doesn't mean they're not going to freeze right back to the ground, so I probably should have been popping all those traps out. I said I didn't have a lot of froze down traps this year. I did have a few, but I didn't have nearly as many as I've had other years. And it's something that I wrestle with every year, is I need to be doing it more often. And speaking of that, I need to do more maintenance days. I don't drive right up to every coyote set. I typically have all my sets a quarter mile roughly off of a road. I like them about that distance. It keeps, if I do have a coyote caught or anything caught, it keeps them out of people's sight if they're driving down the roads. But I also don't want to be driving across everybody's field every day. You know, this year we got a rain a couple days during the season. Things get muddy. I don't want to be driving across, you know, 100 miles of field every day. You know, eventually you're going to get stuck someplace, and that isn't, you know, that isn't ideal either. Because out here you could be walking 4 or 5 miles to find somebody home to come help pull you out. So yeah, I keep my sets so I can check them with binoculars. I have a pair of 15 power binoculars. I can pick out even a skunk. I even can see rabbits in my coyote sets. If I do happen to catch a rabbit, or squirrels, I can typically see that the set's been disturbed or whatever. And my rule is always, when in doubt, drive out. So if I think that it even looks a bit suspicious, I drive out there to make sure there's not a catch in there. Our rule is, I have a 24-hour check law, or everyday check law here in Minnesota. So I don't want to be dealing with having something caught and having somebody find it and then get tagged for having something caught that I could have easily drove out there to check it and I didn't. So you kind of play the risk with that. But I make sure, like I said, I actually, before I put a set, I will stop on a road where I want to check it from, and I will watch, like look along a fence line or whatever to see where there's a little high spot in the fence line or something, to make sure I can see my set. I don't want my set in a little dip that I can't see from the road and then be guessing whether I have catches or not. But so, because I check them with binoculars, I don't drive by every set every day. Deer step on my traps. I use a muffin wrapper for a pan cover. I actually really like that for several reasons, but the main reason that I'm going to say here is if my trap is set off, a lot of times they'll stick to the pan or they'll get caught in the jaw of my trap. When I'm looking at my trap with binoculars, if I see a white spot out there, I drive out there and probably 9.5 times out of 10, my trap is set off. But I can see my muffin wrapper. I can't typically see my trap a lot of times. I can see the muffin wrapper. But yeah, I need to do maintenance days more often. I should be probably doing them in my area here with the deer and stuff that set them off. And I do get dug up traps just like everyone else. I should probably be doing it about every 3 days. At least part of my line, you know, whether I stagger it, do a third of my line today, a third tomorrow, a third the next day, and then start over or whatever. I should probably be doing it. I get in a big rush. I mean, you seeing, I was skinning after dark every night, you know, for several weeks straight there. It's hard to make and find the time to go do a maintenance day, start maintaining traps, because it does take time to make sure, you know, to get them rebedded and everything else. Next thing on my list, I probably should have, I don't put 2 traps in every location. This year, I think I had 4 spots where I had 2 traps in within 20 feet of each other. Otherwise, I mean, I had some that were 100 yards apart. I don't consider that 2 traps in one location. I probably need to be doing it more often. And this year I tried putting trail cameras on a few sets that I had doubles like that, where I have done very well in the past. I just didn't pick the ones that I made catches on. I had 4 spots, 2 of them had cameras, 2 of them didn't. The ones without cameras, I made all the catches. The ones with cameras, I didn't hardly make a catch at all. So I don't know if the cameras had nothing to do with that, honestly. I just think it just happened to be one spot where I had a double. Actually, I did have a camera. I take that back. I had it on one set. The other set was kind of around a rock pile a little bit, out in the middle of a section. The one around the rock pile made all the catches. The one I had my camera on did not make a single catch the entire season. And I was having trouble. That's the next thing on my list is on this rock pile out there, and I'll talk about that particular set. It had a bunch of brush on it, and it was a cornfield on the west side of it. And that is important in our area because our predominant wind is a northwest wind, especially in the fall. What I ended up having happen, I put my set right up against the weeds and stuff that were on this rock pile because otherwise it's just barren field. The corn stalks were blowing off of the field and they were packing right up against this rock pile and all the weeds and stuff. Every day I was picking off like 4 inches of corn stalk, leaves, and debris off of my set. Like it literally would cover the whole set over. I'm not saying that if a coyote come by, he wouldn't smell my set and maybe go over there, but now I got, you know, that much debris has got to step through to 1, set my trap off, and 2, like my trap's got to go through all of that. In that instance, I probably should have had both my sets kind of on the end of the rock pile where any debris would not have followed up my trap, or, you know, better chance that it wouldn't have followed up my trap. That is something, like I said, and I think during the season when I caught that badger, I think I made a comment, something like that, you know, don't use corn stalks as your backer. A corn stalk that's rooted there, you can, but like leaves and stuff like that, I do not use them for backers because all it takes is a good windstorm, you know, and we get winds 40 miles an hour plus in the fall. It will blow all your corn stalks away and now you have no backer. You might have put your lure on that. Now your lure is God knows where. So I try to use a dirt clump before I'll use the leaves. I don't mind using the leaves for a backer if I put dirt on top of them just to kind of hold them there. But I very rarely will even do that. Like I said, I try to make sure I'm using a dirt clump or something solid that's not going to blow away. I want my scent to stay right at my trap. I don't want it over there 10 feet or half a mile away or anything else. I want it right at my set. Fourth thing I have, and I have the boards already, I need to make some more stretchers. I didn't get all my coyotes put up before my fur buyer basically told me that I needed to sell them or I wasn't going to sell them. So I had 12 out of 46 coyotes. So I ended up shooting a few this fall. I made a trip out to western North Dakota and shot some. I had 12 of them I didn't get put up before the fur buyer wanted them, or before he basically told me I had to sell them or I wasn't going to be able to sell them to him. So I have 6 split stretchers and 1 solid stretcher. I have enough boards. I'm going to make 4 more split stretchers. Basically, I only put up fur in the weekends. Once I'm done running my main line, I just skin and freeze everything during my main line. And then every weekend, I'll come and put fur up. 4 extra stretchers every week is going to make a huge difference, especially if I have that many coyotes to be putting up. This year, I started doing something different. Typically, I don't wash any of my fur except for badgers. Badgers almost every time are all muddy or dirt stuck in their fur, so I have washed my badgers forever. I started this year washing all my coyotes, and like a coyote, if I get a real bloody one or something like that, I do not shoot my animals, and so I typically don't get blood on them anymore, or very little blood. But I actually washed every one this year, you know, and it just makes them, like, the coyotes, you gotta remember, when they're in your trap, they're rolling around. Even ones you catch in a snare, they're out in the wild, they're rolling around in the dirt to get bugs and whatever off of them. It doesn't matter whether they look dirty or not. I found, like, you stick a coyote and you throw them in water, like, your water will turn brown almost instantly. There's that much dirt just, you know, loosely on a coyote. Well, that dirt is making your coyote, one, look that much darker in color, which I typically have kind of a brownish colored coyote here. I don't have the nice white silky ones. So every bit of dark on there, I want to get off of there. So it actually is a little more dinking around because I have to basically wash them, and I let them basically hang for a day, fur side out. I even run a fan on them on a real low speed just to get them the fur to dry before I flesh them. So I skin them, wash them, and then let them dry, the fur dry the best I can, and then flesh them, and then put them on the boards. Having the wet flesh actually is pretty nice. It actually seems like it does make it a little easier on a coyote when you only have like just that membrane. Having it wet actually almost makes it a little easier to peel it off. When it's dried on, kind of crusty, sometimes you can really fight to flesh it off. When it was wet, it would actually come off pretty easily. Next thing, every year, the last few years, I say I'm going to do this, and I very rarely do it. I do it if I catch badgers. I need to be adding an extra set. So if I actually do have a spot where I make a catch or even a couple catches in one spot, like I said, a lot of times I only put one trap in a location. I need to be adding another set there. When I catch badgers, I do it automatically now. I need to make a better habit of doing that even with coyotes. If I already have 2 sets in a location, I probably won't add a third one. Unless I have doubles or something like that, I maybe should be adding a third one. I don't think in our area that I don't think the coyotes are traveling in packs a lot of times, especially not in the fall. I think it's a lot of just single coyotes. But when you have a dirty set, I think there's sometimes coyotes don't want to go into that set, or even other animals, fox and raccoons might not want to go into a set caught that has all that coyote smell there. I should be moving over 10 feet, 15 feet, whatever, putting in a second clean set. I've said it for a few years. I just have never really got it put into practice, and I need to get better at that. Something that I had go on this year that I've never had in the past, because I had so much more fur this year. My coyotes and fox, some of the very early caught ones obviously were in the bottom of my freezer. When I got around to putting them up, they almost got freeze dried in my freezer. I will leave them fur out, and I will stuff the nose inside, and then I kind of stuff the butt inside, so they're, you know, only that long, you know, and that big around, whatever. So they're all kind of stuffed inside each other. And then when I put them in my freezer, I actually will stack them and put a couple boards on top, and then even a couple of red bricks on top to kind of squeeze all the air out. Otherwise they take up a lot of room. So it squeezes them down, and hopefully I try to get as much like skin to skin contact in there just so it doesn't freezer burn. But I had one fox, basically, by washing them, it kind of alleviated this a little bit because it rehydrated it. But it was to the point where probably you know, a full mature size fox ended up being basically like a short, you know, like a kit size fox, just because he was so dried up. I could not get him stretched on my board, get him slid down my board. He had like kind of a big wrinkle up on his neck because I couldn't get like his body stretched down over the stretcher because he had freeze dried kind of in a weird shrunk down position, and I could not get him on there as good as you would like. So that's two things. Having more boards so I can get more of them put up quicker will help that. And then I don't know what else I need to do, but I need to try and be better at trying to get them sealed up so they don't freeze or burn like that. Last thing on coyotes, and this is kind of, I talked a little bit about it. I'm going to try and put a few more cameras out on sets just so I could kind of see what they're doing. I don't know if I need to get them farther away or what I need to do just so they're using, you know, some of the spots again where I do typically good every year. I need to probably put a few more trail cameras out, or I want to put a few more trail cameras out just so I can see what's going on. All right, so we're almost done here. Fox, two things: the leaving in the freezer too long because the freezer dry, and the other one is I typically don't cut holes in my pelts anymore. I mean, you know, I kind of take my time. I don't go too crazy at them. Fox are one of those things. They have such a paper thin hide. 3 out of the 8 fox that or 3 out of 7 that I caught, and I had one that was roadkill that was damaged already. But I ended up tearing a hole in the flank, like right where like the front of their hip is. I don't know if I've ever tore a hole right there in a fox before, and I did it on 3 of them this year. Fox prices are down so far. I honestly didn't even waste my time to sew them. The fur buyer actually pointed them out that, you know, why that I leave them like that or whatever. I don't think he wanted me sewing them, but he just kind of pointed out that they had the holes in them. So I don't know what, I just got to be a little more careful around, typically the belly. I am very careful on the bellies, but I don't know, I just got a little too rough where like that belly hair meets the side hair. There's kind of a line you can physically see in the pelt side or in the skin side, and I just need to be a little more careful there. Last animal that I'm going to talk about is badgers. So my fur buyer mentioned to me a couple years ago that badgers, I don't know if he has a buyer for them or why, but badgers with feet on have more value to him than ones without the feet on them. Especially some of the real early caught, like the real flat ones. I only trap till the end of November, so I don't really get like the super puffy badgers. I had 2 that were really nice this year, but I had 1 that was real flat looking. And that's typically about what I get. I'll catch a few a little later that do have a little fluff, but they're still fairly flat looking badgers. I left the feet on this year, and I still only got $15 a piece for them. So I'm kind of in an eternal battle. I probably maybe would have got even $7.50 or $10 average if I would have put them up normally. So I don't know. And I actually kind of tussled last year. I put up a couple flat open, and actually that was fairly easy. And without the feet on there, you can do that. When you leave feet on, you can't. By leaving them flat and open, kind of solved one of my next issues. I wash all my badgers. I've stated that. Badgers are one animal that I found that you got to make sure, that I got to make sure, I don't know if this is true for everybody, you got to make sure that that fur is dry, and that what I've had issues with the past, if they're still a little bit damp and I start fleshing them, I don't know, just from the force it takes to flesh a badger, and I am getting better at doing it, and that might be helping. It will slip a little on my beam, and it'll actually pull hair out. And I had one that I literally had a spot like that where my hair slipped while I was fleshing it. So part of that is that the hide doesn't really, even though the fur gets fairly dry, like I make sure that they get good and dry before I start to flesh them. My leather side is still wet. I put my badgers on skin side out, and I will leave them for a day, sometimes even close to 2. I want that hide fairly dry before I turn them. And you turn them so you sell them fur out. I have trouble with my pellets molding between my board and my pelt after I turn them. And that's, like I said, weaving them 2 days, and sometimes it's taken me up to an hour just to turn a badger because I've left them too long and they still mold between my board and the pelt. I don't know that it hurts anything. I've never had the buyer actually say that there's anything wrong with that. If you ship them to an auction, if they see that, they might grade you as damaged, and I definitely don't want that. So I don't know what I can do differently. If I need to put them on a wire stretcher so it leaves air in between, I really don't know. I gotta try and figure out something, do some research. If you guys have any suggestions for me, please leave them in the comments, because I really do not know how to stop them from molding. If I put them up open, I put them up like a beaver so the skin is on the top, you know, away from the board, I didn't have any issues with those molding. So if I don't leave feed on, I may put up all my badgers open, honestly, and then I don't have the issue with it. The issue you have is you got to have a board big enough to do it. And if you're doing beavers or whatever, you know, I have put them on my beaver boards, but if I'm doing beavers at the same time, it kind of, you know, I can't really put them both on there. And the last little bit I have on badgers is the last day when I was trapping muskrats in the huts was the last day I had to put up fur. I had a badger on, skin side out, drying. Right before I was going to leave that day, I was going to turn him, but I was hoping I was going to catch that last muskrat, which you guys seen I didn't catch a muskrat on the last check. When I got home, I didn't have any muskrats to skin or put up. I didn't go back in my basement, and I did not turn that badger, so I ended up selling him fur in. The buyer did the best he could, feeling what the fur looked like on the inside. I think he gave me a fair price for it. He gave me the same as what the other heavier badger I had. So I don't think he really docked me. Sorry about that. I don't think he really docked me for it. But you do have to make sure you remember to turn them. And that's true for fox and coyotes as well, and any fur out animal, fishers. All right, guys. So I think that's the last little bit of lessons learned I have for this year. I didn't really, I trap raccoons and skunks. I don't want to catch skunks. Some guys, you know, have commented on a couple of my videos about the skunks. I don't want to catch them for two reasons. One, they stink up my sets, and two, it takes me like 15 minutes to deal with them. I inject them to dispatch them, but you still got to wait for that to work. I use gloves to take them out. Now my traps, you know, whether they spray while you eject them or not, your trap still smells a little bit, the area still smells a little bit, and then I have to haul them around in my truck with all the other fur. I put them in a bag just so they don't touch the rest of my fur, but they still smell up the back of my truck. I don't really have any lessons learned on raccoons and skunks. I feel like I have a pretty decent system. If anything, I need to just get more raccoon sets out, maybe in some more creek bottoms and that type of stuff that actually have a little bit of running water. I knew numbers were going to be down this year, so I actually kind of purposely avoided some of the spots just to let the numbers build back up a little bit. All right, I think that's everything I can think of. Again, I appreciate you guys watching my series again this year. Stay tuned. Like I said, every other Friday through the summer here, there'll be kind of fur shed style videos. It's going to be trap prep, building. Maybe I'm going to try and build a cage trap for muskrats. I'll probably try and do a little video on that. I have a video on a catch pole. We'll try and get that uploaded for you guys. I have the video, probably the next video after this one's going to be my muskrat stretcher size, because to me that's a very important lesson I learned this year, is that, you know, I probably kicked myself in the butt because I lost a fair amount of money on my muskrats this year because of stretching them too wide. So yeah, the muskrat stretcher video is probably going to be the next one after this video. Like I said, it'll be 2 Fridays from now. Yeah, otherwise, thanks for watching Schmattz Outdoors. Again, if you have any ideas for videos you guys want to see, leave them in the comments below. Give me a thumbs up on this video if any of my lessons here helped you. If you have any other lessons that I maybe didn't catch that you think I should maybe try and implement, go ahead and leave those in the comments. give me a subscribe. Like I said, I'll be doing this again next fall, so there'll be lots of videos coming out. Otherwise, thanks for watching Schmattz Outdoors.